Flight attendants of Reddit, what's your most NSFW story? For some reason I scream in my sleep occasionally like someone is trying to murder me. I took some Ativan. Got on a plane. Woke up halfway through the flight surrounded by worried faces and a man holding me down. Apparently L was having an episode in my sleep. I couldn't stop laughing at how ridiculous it all was. So I looked like a crazy person. I finally convinced the flight attendants that it's just a thing I do sometimes and that I would need some coffee to stay awake for the remainder of the flight. Once I saw a girl giving a hand job to her boyfriend under a blanket. You could see what she was doing pretty clearly, but they just didn't care. This was in business class. I work for the airlines and one of our flights served lunch just after takeoff and one of the passengers asked, "Why is my quinoa moving?" Turns out the salad served unfortunately came with complimentary maggots. All the food served was taken back and nobody ate for the remainder of the 8-hour flight. Surprised this didn't make the news. Reverse story. I was on a long overseas flight and put a blanket over my lap to sleep. I had my hands clasped together under the blanket in my lap. I was woken up by a flight attendant who asked me what I was doing with a wink in her eye. Having just woken up I was confused. But she peeled back the blanket too. Obviously nothing. We kinda just looked at each other. Paused. And she handed my blanket back. I'm not sure if she wanted me to take a lead or what. Anyway. I drifted back to sleep in a few minutes and that was that. Maybe I furiously masturbate in my sleep and have no idea. My mom was telling me how a woman died from a stroke on her flight and wasn't discovered until several hours later. Her partner was next to her. Source. Mom is purser for big airline. Edit. Stop questioning my mom's undeniable power in relation to aircrafts. Flight attendant here. Caught a guy peeing on a family. Had to call an emergency landing. Guy later admitted to being high on pills and thought he was in a lavatory. Had no recollection of doing what he did. The whole family just sat there and took a golden shower. Several months ago during a flight which I was unfortunately working. A man was so inspired by the goddess of a woman sitting next to him that he simply had to masturbate. In his seat. Just sitting next to her. Indiscreetly jerking in under a blanket. Her boyfriend took a video. Law enforcement got involved. Awkward. Eater. A comma. Also, I've been thinking about this throughout the day and it seems to me that I've seen a lot of non-recreational dicks over the years. It doesn't seem like I should be seeing this many dicks at work, but then again, I am a flight attendant. I would like to take this moment to encourage everyone to not wear short shorts while going commando. Double check to make sure flies are zipped. Also please make sure that the lavatory door is locked. Especially if you're going to sit in there and go for your solo MHC cert. Had a couple switch seats in the back part of the plane during boarding to be able to sit together. Later we found them in the lav together. I think she was giving him head. One of the other FARs working the flight said, "Wait, that's not her husband." She came on with a different guy. Turns out her husband was sitting in the front of the plane. Totally oblivious. Edit. Since a ton of people are wondering how we knew it was her husband. They boarded the flight together and the front flight attendants could tell they were together. After the lav head incident. We were doing beverage service and I asked the guy, "Oh, is that blonde lady back there your wife?" She was saying, "You got split up." That's too bad. Full stop. After the flight. He waited at the bottom of the outdoor ramp until she got off the plane. And we watched them walk into the airport together. Passengers seem to always forget that those of that work in the back can see your phone screens. And all that PRN. So much PRN. So much PRN on the aircraft. I once had a flight attendant open the bathroom door on me. I was laying a log and was 11 years old. Was in FAR for an airline for 8 months. Then did corporate work on and off for a bit. ACA private planes only. Close bracket. People die a lot. A lot of FARs end up meeting passengers romantically. If is up with the plane. Passengers have no idea. Drunk people are the reason for like 90% of behavioral issues. Edit. We know you're farting. It's okay. Everyone gets gassy on planes. My great uncle was married to a far and she was cheating on him with a pilot. He found out. Took a gun and shot and killed the pilot in the airport bathroom. Did some time in a federal prison, but the crazy part was the judge literally told him he couldn't condone murder, but he would have done the same if it was his wife. I swear. Someone could ask a question like humans. What is something that is NSFW? And somehow there would be a ton of not a human. But my GF is a refer and I regret reading this thread. Coming into Salt Lake City and it was extremely turbulent. A kid lost his lunch with projectile vomit. Got all over him and the passenger next to him. Across the aisle on the passengers in the same row. Yeah, cleaning vomit up with the powder from the kit and scooping it up with the SCRP tool. Once at the gate and everyone was off, a cleaning crew came on and took care of the rest. I used to have a fear of vomit, but after being a flight attendant suddenly it's not so bad. Not a flight attendant, but my friend is. She says that an entire red-eye flight full of morning wood is pretty entertaining. I farted on a passenger's bag of pretzels. My friend, who is a flight attendant, she was pregnant. By far the most bizarre thing to happen on my flight. Flying into LaGuardia, we get a lot of Hasidic Jews on our flights. Large Hasidic man was sitting in an aisle seat. He has a yarmulke. Sits it. And everything on. Mid-flight he pulls out his laptop and starts watching PRN. Not just any PRN though. 70s Big Bush PRN. No trying it hide it at all either. As I'm walking down the aisle I can see it from about 5 rows back. I stop. Kneel down and tell him to put it away because everyone can see what he is watching. Including children sitting nearby. He gets all huffy and says, "It's okay. I'm fast forwarding through all the bad parts." I tell him I don't care and he rolls his eyes and puts it away. Obligatory not a flight attendant. But work in the industry and married to a former FA. All the stories you hear about pilots and FAs hooking up. Sometimes in the cockpit, jiggity. But usually on a layover, hell. They're all true. Especially at the smaller regional airlines in the US. Think American Eagle. Delta Connection. United Express. Yes. Even the married ones. That out of the way. The worst thing I ever witnessed was the aftermath of someone dying on a flight. This older lady with advanced lung cancer was flying out west to live out her final days. Well, she literally coughed up a lung on this flight. The plane diverted. And then flew empty back to base to be cleaned. I went to see if the stories were true. They were. Blood was everywhere. At least one of the flight attendants was on light duty for 6 months because of the psychological trauma. Even the married ones. Married to a former FA. Hey OP. Listen. Was married to a FA. Got completely ed over when the obvious happened. Got left with my bones. Still waiting on karma to give me good news one day. I've been in FA for about 4 months now. So thankfully much hasn't happened. But I did have 2 people start a flight as strangers. And by the time we landed, they were no longer strangers. Also a lot of people make out. This is especially weird during the safety demo because I have no choice but to look out at all the seats. Not a FA, but my mom is a retired FA, and my dad is a retired pilot. Cue the jokes. And I've heard stories about SX under blankets, SX in the bathrooms, people from certain countries not accustomed to toilet signing in sinks and on the floor, drunk man eyeing himself because he was told to stay in his seat and was causing a scene. Then cops were called and he was arrested. Not after a fight with the cops, which ended with him covered in his own blood as he was being escorted off the plane. Man dying of a heart attack and his grieving wife having to sit next to him the entire way home. Dead ducks everywhere. This was a chartered flight for hunters back in the 70s. I'm sure there's more, but that's what I remember off the top of my head. Also, Sexual harassment was basically in a FAR's job description back in the 70s. We've come a long way, but still so far to go. Not a flight attendant. Belinda blinked. I've been in FAR for the better part of 2 years. And for the most part it has been smooth sailing. I had a red-eye flight from Hawaii once where a couple decided to sleep on the floor at the foot of their seats. Not sure if there was anything going on. There might have been. But like everyone else on the plane they seemed to be sleeping. But the woman was outraged that my co-worker asked them to return to their seats for landing. Upon deplaning, she told said co-worker that it was the worst service she'd ever had. Because they'd been asked to return to their seats. Not really the juiciest story. But you do get to meet some unique passengers. And pro tip. It's always better to sleep in your seat or across a bank of seats. Rather than on the floor. Actual FAR here. Most NSFW was a group of uniformed military passengers who thought it was okay to keep flares and CO2 cartridges in their checked baggage. Ground crew caught it and we almost pulled 10 people off our flight. It was an honest mistake. And there were extenuating circumstances. Everyone was laughing after it got sorted out, but it's still pretty serious. You super cannot put flares and pressurized canisters in your bags. Y'all. Not a flight attendant, but I jerked off in the first class lavatory. I high-fived myself as I returned to my seat. Seeing as how I had just made it to the Mile High Club. Got the solo membership. This isn't about passengers. It's about a pilot. I'll make the story short. We were out on an overnight getting drinks. Many drinks. He keeps trying to tell me and the other FAR about all the FARs that he's bedding. And how his wife found out but she is still with him. So he's trying to tell us this and show us photos of him and these women in intimate positions and I'm disgusted. Of course. He doesn't like me and my reactions. Somehow. That led to him exposing himself to us 3 times that night. After we said no. Don't do that. This guy is one of those rare few that give pilots a bad name. I don't hesitate to tell everyone about him and to avoid him. Edit. Yes. I should have reported him. Here's what stopped me. The next day he told me that I had punched him in the balls and said don't touch me. I don't remember this, but if it's true, I'll probably end up the one in trouble because FARs are more replaceable than pilots. Breastfeeding with the most enormous titties out. Both all out in the seat like on the tray table with one in the infant's mouth. He looked at me and smiled. Proud of those giant melons. I am gay and smiled back. Acknowledging how large indeed and magnificent those tartas are and how happy she must be. My mom was an international flight attendant and her go-to story is that once there was a man with a long beard and a turban on the plane. This man clearly had not been on a plane before and was not used to all things Western. This man went into the bathroom and came out with blue liquid dripping from his beard onto his shirt since yup. You guessed it. He washed his face in the toilet. That's not really how plane toilets work though. One day right before pushback our flight attendant called the cockpit to tell us that a passenger was taking upskirt pictures of the woman across the aisle. He apparently was trying to disguise it as a selfie. Somehow. I had the front bulkhead seat and on takeoff one of the ovens, which hadn't been secured after being replaced immediately before the flight, jumped off the wall and crashed into my legs. I felt like that wasn't very safe, NSFW. The oven had metal trays inside. And if you have never heard the sound of an oven full of metal trays crashing to the floor during takeoff, you can't even imagine the racket nor the subsequent gasps and defecation from the passengers. Not a FAR, but I once had sex with Eartha Kitt in an airplane bathroom. Many men apparently jerking off on planes. I'm not an F. But I did work for an airline company and I used to fly with the plane to offload the cargo on a passenger -8-200. For this story I wasn't on this flight. Passengers were getting ready to board the flight and one absolute unit had to take a but refused to use the washroom in the airport and said he can hold it. The counter staff said to the passenger you should use the toilet in the airport but still refused to do so. So they board the plane. Middle of the flight the guy can't hold it in anymore and tries to go in the lav but he's too big to go in the lav. And the lav is in front of the plane so behind the cockpit. Anyway he can't fit in the lav and he doesn't want to his pants so the F grabs newspapers and lays them on the floor. She shut the curtains for him and he proceeds to on the floor in the galley with the curtain closed in front of the passengers. It was the A flight attendant. Once put down a bunch of paper towels on top of the toilet lid and dapped down and rubbed one out in the lav while working a red eye. I was really sleepy and bored and everyone was sleeping. I visit Albuquerque every year. But the moral of the story is I hate sauerkraut. And here I am. Thinking if dating someone who is working towards ATP. Not a far but I was hit on by one. I am super polite on flights because it's the best way to keep the drinks flowing two at a time. We started making small conversation more and more when she brought me drinks. She asked me if I was getting off at Singapore and I replied no. She said that's a shame we could have gotten off together and rubbed my neck and behind my ear. She must really like the nice guy thing. I was quite flattered and told my wife and she laughed her ass off. Not a far but I once closed 2 toilets before the plane took off from Sydney to Dubai. One was an asplosion and the other was vomit. Got food poisoning from a meal before the flight. 9/11 probably. Not a flight attendant. But a passenger. I was on a flight to China in first class. When the passenger in front of me was seated, I looked up and saw a massive gaping and pus-filled hole in his head. It was the size of a fist. And there was a thin piece of mesh covering it. I stared at that thing for the whole flight. Former FAR. I was working a red eye from Seattle to Dallas one night and one of the other FARs had gotten a complaint from a female passenger concerned about the activities of a couple seated a few rows ahead of her. I'm not sure exactly how everything went down but it ended with that flight attendant turning every cabin light on and sternly explaining to the couple that they cannot be doing that here. Absolutely humiliating the couple. Nothing came about it after that and we only had about 40 minutes of flight time left. She told us the girl was giving him oral in the seat and that she was not being desecrate. I just became an FA and on my way to flighter training. The FA on the plane was a smoking hot young FA and she told me she has a BF in North Carolina and a BF in Memphis and was trying to bag me too. She said the pay is bad at regionals so she needed free rent and food. And so she had 2 BFs in different cities. You gotta do what you gotta do. Uninformed degenerate here. I'm in a plane's bathroom. I wonder if I'm in Colorado counts as being mile high. The obvious answer here was 9/11. Not a flight attendant. But I'm wanking in bed right now. Obligatory not a flight attendant but I know someone who used to be one and she said that she used to be a flight attendant. Not a flight attendant. But after falling in the aisle due to a foot injury and being unable to get up. Sorry about your injury in full. But there is no around in an airplane aisle. Oh boy. I got a story and a half for this one. My professor in college used to be a flight attendant. She told us about a flight from Paris, Montreal. A woman had an infant in her lap. And for the duration of the entire flight, the baby had not made a noise. Didn't cry. Feed. Have to change diapers or anything. Mind you. This is a roughly 8 hours flight. Plus boarding and getting off. That's almost 9 hours of this baby being on board. Obviously. People got suspicious and when they landed, the lady had been arrested. Turns out the baby was dead and been stuffed with a large amount of heroin. That story still s with me. There are a lot of not. This was on a flight from Philly to LA. Anyway. This one party tried drinking 70 beers apiece. It got so bad. One of the members just hung up and left to North Dakota. I saw a man's dick before. As a drug test urine collector who literally sees dick every day at work, I don't understand how this ruins a job for you.